Same thing when I was working with basketball players and running sprints. If somebody stops 6 inches short of the line, doesn't touch the line, does that mean they're not going to have a good game tomorrow? No, of course not. But if they stop 6 inches short today, maybe they'll stop it, 7 inches short tomorrow. Or maybe instead of doing that on one sprint, they'll do it in 2 sprints. It will start to metastasize and start to spread. So the reason that I believe in that, how you do anything is how you do everything, is from the mere conditioning fact of creating habits. And I don't mean it, again, from the literal sense. I'm not saying that I need to give the exact same effort washing dishes that I give when I'm on stage, but I need to take pride in both.
What does high performance mean to you?
There's so many different directions I could go with that. I mean, an initial thought that pops up is, upholding a high standard of excellence in everything that you do. I think it's important that we almost take a step back and let's kind of define performance, because I think some people relegate the word performance to athletics, or to the arts, like literally being on stage, giving a performance. But I view performance in every aspect of our lives. We perform personally, we perform professionally, we perform individually, we perform organizationally. We perform at a variety of capacities. And I've always been a believer that how you do anything is how you do everything, and that the goal should be to maximize your performance in every area of your life as consistently as possible, instead of picking and choosing when to be excellent or when to be good or when to give your best effort or when to perform well. We should aim to perform well in everything that we do. And I think taking kind of that holistic approach is what resonates most with me when I hear the word high performance.
Right. I love that. And in that sense, you can be a high performer in your marriage, for your community, as well as you said, on those stages. But I'd love to pick up on that quote that you said, how you do anything is how you do, oh, sorry, how you do everything. No, how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yep.
I love that quote. And I'm just like thinking through that in my mind, because I guess, well, most people, particularly people I've seen in university, they say, well, I can flow through the year, and then when finals come around, then I can smash it out. So I wonder, could you kind of maybe go a little bit deeper on that quote? Because I think that's really profound.
Sure. Well, what's funny is I have a couple of really good friends and colleagues, guys that I really respect, and they debate me on this. They actually don't believe that how you do anything is how you do everything. And we've had some good, back and forth on that, but it is something that resonates with me. Now, clearly, if your only metric is external and you're playing the comparison game, then you can get away with maybe not performing well in one area, performing well in another, and still performing at a high enough level and feeling good about it. But I don't think you're the best that you're capable of unless you keep that switch on all of the time. Perfect example would be back when I was in the basketball training space, and I was working mostly with high school age players, and some of them, understandably, did not give their academic work the same level of effort that they gave their basketball training. And they would, in their minds, they'd think, hey, I can just kind of float by academically, but I'm a good enough basketball player that I'll still be able to move on and to progress. And I wasn't arguing that that was true. Some of them were so talented that, yeah, there's plenty of universities and college that would give them a scholarship just for being a great basketball player. But I actually think them not trying to perform well academically limits their ability to perform in everything else that they do. So it's a matter of, what are you using to measure? Are you becoming the best that you're capable of? And if that's the case, I still stand by, you need to have that switch on for everything that you do. And yeah, but like I said, I know some people are detractors to that comment, but it's one that really resonates strongly with me.
Yeah, me as well. And it's interesting because I had a conversation with the former Navy SEAL, Rich Diviney.
Oh yeah.
And I remember when I spoke to him, he told me that that he had a difference in his mind between peak and optimal performance.
Yeah.
And I remember he said that, if I'm just kind of jogging my memory on this, but I remember he said that peak performance was kind of, it was, you finished top of the class in one exam, you win a powerlifting competition, or you finish a 100-meter sprint. He said it typically happens maybe once or twice. It's all downhill. You have to prepare, you have to train for that. He said, but optimal performance was kind of everyday life. That was how am I performing in the context of how I'm feeling today, in the circumstances. And I remember he said to me, if my best on a normal day is this, but today I've had this big fight with my spouse, and I have bad old habits. Maybe my best for today is just to not relapse into those habits instead of making progress to my goal. I wonder if you kind of think that's kind of a useful kind of insight into what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Rich's work, and that was one of the things that I was most drawn to was him showing discernment between the two. Because previously I had always used the term peak performance when I actually meant optimal performance. And I'm someone that is very careful in my word choice and selection. I study language and fascinated by language, but I really like the way that he brought that up. I mean, ultimately, what he's saying is, every day in every area of our life, we should be looking to optimally perform, but that will always be in the context of how we feel about what's going on, and all those different things. Whereas peak is more about trying to reach that apex at a very predetermined set time. I'm training for the Olympics. So in 4 years, I want to be in my peak physical shape for that Olympic event. That's very different than aiming for optimal performance every single day between now and then. So I really like the discernment between the two. And I've actually switched up my word choice, and I actually use the word optimal now for that exact reason.
Oh man, I love that. I love that. I would kind of love to I guess talk about, your life and kind of go through the arc of your work before we jump into your two books. But I think, a lot of people when they type you in on Google, one of the things that obviously comes up is that you've worked with some real superstars. And I kind of would just have to maybe start from there. So some of the names that comes up, Kobe Bryant, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant. I wonder, could you kind of share how you met and got to work with these people, and kind of the story there, how that came about?
Most of my work was done at the middle school and high school age level, and that was actually by design and by choice. That was an age that I felt I could be a good role model for. That was an age where I felt like I could make a bigger impact on their lives, not just on the court or in the weight room. So most of the work that I did was aimed for middle school and high school age players. However, I was very fortunate to work at 2 different high schools here in the Washington, D.C. area in the United States that has produced over a dozen players currently in the NBA. You just mentioned one of them, Kevin Durant. So I had a chance to start working with KD when he was 15 years old. So this is well before he became the NBA superstar that everybody knows today. So I was focused on working with that age. But because the players were so talented, this was not through any of my doing. They were just really talented players. That's what led to work with Nike and Jordan Brand and USA Basketball. And then I got to work events for guys like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Stephen Curry, Chris Paul, Steve Nash. So really, it was the work. I live by another mantra, which is star where you are. Wherever you are, give everything you can to that position or that role or that team or that organization. And by doing the very best that you're capable of, that will open up doors and open up opportunities for you to move up and to do some other things. And that's ultimately what happened. Nike and Jordan took notice of the work I was doing with high school players, and they said, will you come do that with some of our pros? It wasn't anything that I was intentionally trying to search out. They didn't have to twist my arm to go do that. Trust me, I was really excited to do it. But my main goal was to serve the players right in front of me. And that's what opened up those opportunities. And then, like many things, then once I had an opportunity to work with some of those guys like Kobe and LeBron, then that kind of in a circular fashion started bringing in other people in high school. Like, it just, everything grew. So I certainly can understand the cachet of the name recognition of some of those guys, but the percentage of work that I did with the NBA players was very small compared to the percentage of work that I did with high school kids. And I was good with that.
Yeah, man, I love that. And I also love the kind of lesson of, starting where you are and, I guess kind of bringing it back to what you talked about earlier, how you do anything is how you do everything. And this reminds me of kind of when I was teaching in universities. And I remember thinking back to here in I'm not sure what it's like in the US, but here in the UK, your first year of university, it doesn't really count as long as you get 40%. You can go through the next year, it doesn't count towards your degree. And the amount of students that said to me, as long as I pass the year, I'll be fine with that. I can go and, study really hard the next 2 years and get a first class degree. And almost certainly, I never saw that happen. I never I can't think of any examples of exactly when that happened. So I really do believe that kind of, uh, I'm not sure. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Perhaps is it the habits that you're ingraining in yourself? Is it kind of forming the identity of someone that just takes it easy? Why do you think that is, that you can't just, be half-hearted and then suddenly become an elite performer overnight? Why is that?
You just nailed it so perfectly and with so much insight. It's that old, and I believe it was Aristotle's quote, "We are what we repeatedly do." So we need to practice and create the habit of giving our best. One of the things that folks that follow me on social know I'm adamant about is returning your shopping cart back when you're done at the grocery store. And is it possible for me to abandon my shopping cart in the middle of the parking lot and still be a really good keynote speaker? Of course, absolutely, it's possible. I'm not saying that those things are mutually exclusive. What I'm saying is, if in that little area of my life, I'm willing to cut corners and willing to take a shortcut and willing to do less, willing to not leave a place better than I found it, that will slowly bleed into other areas of my life. And over time, then when there's a shortcut to take for being a keynote speaker, I'll be more likely to take it because I've created the habit of a shortcut. Same thing when I was working with basketball players and running sprints. If somebody stops 6 inches short of the line, doesn't touch the line, does that mean they're not going to have a good game tomorrow? No, of course not. But if they stop 6 inches short today, maybe they'll stop at 7 inches short tomorrow. Or maybe instead of doing that on one sprint, they'll do it in 2 sprints. It will start to metastasize and start to spread. So the reason that I believe in that, how you do anything is how you do everything, is from the mere conditioning fact of creating habits. And I don't mean it, again, from the literal sense. I'm not saying that I need to give the exact same effort washing dishes that I give when I'm on stage, but I need to take pride in both. I need to put my best foot forward in both, because that's how we develop that habit. And, for me, and I'm not worried about perfection. I threw perfection out the window years ago. I don't think that's an attainable ideal. What I'm interested in is progress, is incrementally getting better, is being consistent. Those are the things that are more important to me now. So am I going to make mistakes and have a lapse in judgment or make a boneheaded decision? Of course. But the goal is to do that, as infrequently as possible, or then you start to create that habit. So to me, that's really what it all comes down to. So yes, can you barely pass your first year at university and it doesn't count against you for the next year? Of course. But why go through an entire year creating poor study habits? Why go an entire year turning in assignments that's less than your best? You are conditioning yourself for mediocrity. And that's where I think we run into an issue.
I agree with every word you just said so violently. I cannot emphasize it enough. But I'd love to kind of go back to kind of where you were talking about, these real titans of the sport. You mentioned the kind of Kobe's, the Kevin Durant's, the Steph Curry's. Are there any kind of lessons from these great people? I read your blog post about Kobe. I thought it was really, really profound and really moving. I'll link it below for people. So I wonder if there's kind of any lessons that you could share from these people.
Absolutely. And there's 3 lessons that jump out immediately. I'm sure that if you and I really, whittled it down, there's probably 12 to 15 total lessons. And my favorite part about these lessons is they have such high utility that Kobe used them to become one of the best basketball players to ever play. but you and I can use them in our own lives. You can use these exact same lessons to become a world-class podcast host. I can use these exact same lessons to be a world-class keynote speaker or to be a better father to my children. Like, these things have high utility. And the three lessons that jump out immediately, the first is never getting bored with the basics, is having a strong respect and reverence for the fundamentals and realizing that they are the foundation to which the rest of the house is built. So you have to work towards mastery of the fundamentals every single day, or at least as consistently as possible during the unseen hours when nobody else is watching. Now, in the game of basketball, the fundamentals are pretty obvious. It's your footwork, it's your shooting mechanics, it's how well you handle the ball. Whoever is listening or watching this show right now, you need to ask yourself, in your area that you're trying to become world-class, are you focusing on the fundamentals of that area, or whatever it may be, or multiple areas? But you got to get crystal clear on what those basics are. And just remember that just because something's basic, it doesn't mean it's easy. Talk about wordplay. Those are not synonyms. And yet people often say those words as if they're interchangeable, but they're not. Many things are very basic in premise, but very challenging to execute consistently. So the first is never getting bored with the basics. The second is the world-class performers like Kobe do a brilliant job of blending confidence with humility. They've earned the right to be confident because they've put in the repetitions during the unseen hours. They've put in the work to deserve success, but they brush that with a massive stroke of humility, which is what allows them to stay open to coaching and is what allows them to stay open to feedback. And most importantly, reminds them that no matter how good they get, they can still get better. That even if someone else says, hey, you are the best player in the NBA, that's okay, because I'm not as good as I'm capable of becoming. So I still want to get in the gym and put in some work. So it's the confidence and humility marriage that they do a brilliant job with. And then the third thing that jumps out, they have great clarity on their North Star, on their goals, their dreams, the person they're trying to become, on what they want to achieve. They're crystal clear on that. But once they have clarity on that, they take their eyes off of that and they put it on the process. They're not near as outcome driven as they are process driven. They realize the process will yield the result as a byproduct if they stick with it. So they're much more interested in their habits, their daily behaviors, the micro skills that are needed to continually incrementally progress until that outcome or desired result, again, just becomes a byproduct. It's just a result of doing what you're supposed to do every single day. Doesn't mean that they're not motivated by the external trappings. It just means that they are heads down, process driven. So if I'm trying to win an NBA championship next June, what can I do today that takes me a little bit closer to that? What can I do today that takes my team a little bit closer to that? And if you can wake up every single day with that type of singular focus of what do I need to accomplish today to get me closer to that, then inevitably you give yourself the best chance of reaching that result. And as I said before, in any industry, in any country, if you focus on the basics, you're confident but remain humble, and you focus on the process, if you can do those three things consistently, you give yourself a really, really, really good chance to perform at a maximum level.
They are really, really, clearly that there's definitely some, just from this show and interviewing, kind of, obviously, I mean, not to that level, but I resonate with those so much. I clearly see habits, differences, and similarities between that and some of the people that I've interviewed. It's interesting because when we put up on Instagram that we were going to interview you, we had a number of people kind of ask that, you've obviously worked with these people, and a number of people kind of asked, there was kind of two kind of contrasting questions that people asked. The first one was, what was it that really drove these people? Were they driven by, love, or the status, or wanting fame, or whatever it was? But the other was, were these people happy? And I wonder if you have any kind of thoughts on those.
Well, from the driving factor, I found that there's two types. There's those, and Kobe Bryant definitely fell into this camp, which is his goal was to be the best. I don't really ascribe to that. My goal is to be my best. And there's a difference between the best and my best. For me, I'm not really worried about comparing myself to other authors or other keynote speakers. I wish them well. I want them to continue to thrive. I mean, it raises the whole industry up. I'll let someone else make a comparison. I just want to be the best that I'm capable of. So a lot of times you got to figure out where that internal drive comes from. Then, that's part of it. And then the second part of the question, tell me the second part of the
were they happy?
Were they happy? I don't have tremendous insight into that. All I can do is speculate. And what's interesting is we all have to acknowledge that we see the world through a very biased lens. Even you and I see the world differently. Based on the fact we were raised in very different places, we're of a different age, all of these things play a factor. I mean, when I just look at my own life, my age, where I grew up, how I was parented, who my friends were, my initial experiences in school and in sports, what I read, watch, and listen to, the types of content I consume, who I invest my time with, all of this shapes the way that I see the world. So I have what I would consider my definition of happiness and fulfillment and so forth. And it's hard for me to not place that judgment on somebody else. So point being, I think if Kobe were alive today, he would admit that during his playing career, he was obsessed with the game. He was obsessed with perfection. He was obsessed with being the best to ever play. That if he missed a handful of shots during a game that he thought he should have made, he would stay up till 2 a.m. the next night in the gym getting those out. Now, through my lens, that doesn't sound like that'd be very happy to, like, I wouldn't be very happy doing that. That's me placing my judgment on him. He probably derived happiness from that. His attempt to be obsessed and to be as close to perfect as possible might have brought him a tremendous amount of joy. Another reference, and I don't know if you or your listeners are as familiar with a gentleman named Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V, who's a big-time entrepreneur here in the United States. Gary is one that, he's a full-time entrepreneur. He preaches to the rafters how much he loves to work. He loves clocking 16, 18-hour days, 6 to 7 days a week. Now, he also loves his family very much. And Gary has done a beautiful job of saying, I'm not telling everyone else they should do this. I'm just telling you this is what I love. So Gary loves working 16-hour days. Gary chooses not to take very many vacations. Like, these are a choice. Now, once again, if I lived that life, I would be severely unhappy. But it appears that that's a perfect fit for Gary. He actually thrives on that. So I do believe Kobe was happy doing it the way that he wanted to do it. That Gary V is happy doing it the way they want to do it. But what we have to remember is their happiness doesn't necessarily equate to my happiness. So what's most important is not playing that comparison game and figuring out to yourself, what makes me happy? Where do I derive joy? Where do I get fulfillment? And how can I build my life around that and not worry about what everybody else does?
I thought that was a really beautiful point. And I think that kind of highlights the point that what can bring one person fulfillment and meaning, we shouldn't ascribe our own value judgments onto that, because, as you said, we all have, I guess, different North Stars.
Can I bring up one other point?
Please.
So
Absolutely.
to that degree, I want to make sure that it goes in both directions. So let's just say, for example, this evening after I eat dinner, I choose to watch a movie on Netflix and just chill out for a couple hours. I can almost promise you that Kobe Bryant or Gary V would be very unhappy laying on the couch watching a movie. Like, that just doesn't do it for them. So for me, that's a great fit. It's how I unwind at night. It's something I find interesting. It allows me to kind of disconnect and chill out, but they would be very unhappy doing that. So it goes back to, we each have to figure that out for ourselves. And if I try to follow the Gary V model, or Gary V tries to follow the Stein Jr. model, you're going to be left feeling unhappy and empty. So we have to create that for ourselves.
Right. And how would, because I'm just thinking by the, if I guess it's, to find that North Star is clearly, I can't look at Kobe Bryant's life and then say, I want this and I want this and I'm going to try and work towards it. I mean, for one, genetically, I would never make it. But anyway, I'd probably be miserable, as you said, being on the basketball court 2 a.m. But if someone kind of doesn't have any perhaps insight into finding that North Star, how would you kind of advise them? Perhaps where would the first place be to kind of look? Is it listening internally?
Part of it. What I would say is the best advice I have ever been given to this day, I received in middle school when a coach told me, find what it is that you love to do, find what it is that you're pretty good at, and then find where those two things intersect. So find what you're passionate about, find where your natural talents are, and then find where those two things crisscross. And where those two things crisscross, that point of intersection is your strength zone. And the more time you can invest in your own strength zone, you'll perform at a higher level, you'll achieve at a higher level, but most importantly, you'll have more happiness, joy, and fulfillment in doing that. And for me, I've stayed true to that since that day. Now, my personal point of intersection has changed over time. You know, my point of intersection when I was younger was as a basketball player. And then it turned into being a basketball performance coach. And now in its current iteration, it's as a keynote speaker and an author. But it still holds true. I'm still doing something I'm passionate about and something that I've got, you know, decent ability and decent talent in. So to me, that's the question that everybody needs to be looking to answer. What do I love and where am I pretty gifted? Now, with that said, if you find something you love, but you don't have a tremendous amount of talent for it, you can still enjoy that as a hobby. You can still enjoy that as your leisure. You know, as you just said, maybe you're not cut from the same genetic cloth as Kobe Bryant, but maybe you still love the game of basketball, but you understand you might not have the genetic predispositions to play in the NBA. That doesn't mean you shouldn't play basketball. You know, you can play in rec leagues or intramurals or go down to the park and shoot by yourself or play one-on-one with a friend. Like, you can still reap the benefits and enjoy the game of basketball, even if you're not going to be world class at it. That's okay. That's ultimately what becomes a hobby. So it's about finding the things that bring us the most enjoyment. And one of the ways we find out what we love to do is by trying things that we don't like doing. You know, trust me, before I went to college, I had several jobs when I was in middle school and high school as a way to earn some extra money, you know, waiting tables, working at retail, like folding clothes. I was a little league umpire. I used to cut grass. Like, I did a lot of different things. And some of those things were okay. And some of those I absolutely despised. Like, if I can help it, I will never wait tables again for the rest of my life because I did not enjoy that. But you know how I know I didn't enjoy it? By doing it and realizing I don't enjoy it. So I'm a huge advocate of people trying a bunch of different things and see what you like and what you don't.
Absolutely. And in my own life, passion has followed momentum, not vice versa. I just have to ask you a couple more questions about kind of high performance before we jump into your fabulous books about burnout. I'd love to ask you, because I was thinking about this as I was kind of preparing for this. And in terms of really what drives people, you know, I was in a gym session not so long ago with one of my friends, and I remember his girlfriend had quite recently broken up with him. And he, I think, kind of just got over the slump. And I think that kind of coming out of the breakup, from my understanding, was that kind of he felt perhaps not good enough. And he'd taken that pain. And in the gym, this guy was working like a machine. And I think that he was kind of, you know, almost like the alchemist, you know, is trying to take real pain and turn it into something beautiful. In my own life, the feeling of trying to prove people wrong, there's no doubt about it, is a tremendous motivating factor. Someone says you can't do something, you kind of go, you know, I want to show you. But I wonder, is that sustainable long term? How should we kind of think about that?
In my my perspective and through my own experience, that's not sustainable unless you're going to keep those things going over and over. You know, if and you almost have to continue to hunt those things out. You know, if you watch The Last Dance about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan, I mean, it got to the point where Michael Jordan almost had to fabricate stories to make himself mad enough to get riled up to want to play. So no, I don't think that's sustainable. I do think it can be helpful short-term fuel. I do think it can be a therapeutic way to take something that's kind of painful and makes you feel lousy and turn it into something that might make you feel a little bit better. So I'm not opposed to it being a tool in the toolbox, but if it's the only tool you have, I don't know that it's sustainable. I mean, you know, if every single person in your life keeps telling you you can't do something, then you need to get some new people in your life. Like, that's a problem. If everybody tells you you're not good enough, every once in a while someone may say that, but if you're surrounding yourself with naysayers because you need that as fuel to move forward, I'd recommend getting some new friends or getting a new circle. If every time you date somebody they break up with you abruptly, instead of blaming them for it, start to look internally and go, okay, what am I bringing to the table that's causing this? How can I do some self-work so that I can rise above this? And that's the lens at which I would look through. I mean, I believe in trying to create frameworks and have approaches and perspectives that are sustainable. And then we have these tools in our toolbox for little short-term fixes when needed. But I think going through life needing to be angry, needing to be pissed off, needing to feel like you have to prove someone wrong, that just sounds exhausting to me. I don't know that I could keep that up for the next 40 years personally, but if it works for somebody else, that's okay too. And that's one thing that I want to make abundantly clear. Everything that I'm sharing right now, everything that I share on stage and everything I share on page, I'm not saying is the right way. I'm not saying is the best way. I'm simply saying these are some constructs that have worked well for me, and I just want to share them in the event they work for someone else. In that same spirit, I also haven't mastered any of this stuff. The stuff I wrote about in Raise Your Game and the stuff I wrote about in Sustain Your Game, I'm not coming from a place of mastery. These are all things that I'm still working on. I'm still challenged by. I still find struggle with. Now, I've made progress in those areas, and I'm very proud of that progress. And I'm proud of the path that I'm on. And I've definitely learned some strategies and some lessons and some approaches that are helping me improve, but I'm not the master of any of it. I mean, the latest book about stress and stagnation and burnout, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I never get stressed or that I've never felt burnout or that I never stagnate. I'm wrestling with those things all of the time, but I'm aware of them. And that's a massive first step.
Yeah, man, I love that. I'd love to ask you, what lesson or lessons have you learned from your recent time with the Navy SEALs?
That was a wonderful experience. For a little context for your listeners, I'm 46 years old and I take a lot of pride in my physical fitness. I mean, I'm proud of the physical shape that I'm in, and I eat right. I get plenty of sleep. I work out consistently. But at my age, I'm not really a competitive athlete anymore. I mean, I don't play on anybody's team, and I'm certainly not training for the Olympics. So I always like to have something on my calendar to train for, something to prepare for, something that keeps my workouts fresh. And I've tried a bunch of different things, and they've been fun. I've done some ultra marathons. I've done a Spartan race. I hiked the rim to rim of the Grand Canyon. And the most recent one was a 26-hour Navy SEAL experience where myself and 14 other civilians, just normal people, had two veteran Navy SEALs take us through kind of a simulated experience. Now, in fairness, what they took us through was heavily watered down and only a fraction of what they actually went through. So I'm not pretending for 1 second that I'm anywhere close to being a Navy SEAL, but it was a really challenging experience. I enjoyed it. It was fun. I learned some great lessons. I felt very well prepared going into it. And it actually exceeded my expectations. But that was something that, I'd never done anything like that. And it not only required a tremendous amount of physical discomfort, but a lot of mental and emotional discomfort as well. So that was really something that was fun to train for. And, my biggest lesson leaving that was how much all of us, and I know we reside in different countries, but how much all of us should pay a debt of gratitude to the men and women of our armed services that protect the freedoms that you and I get to enjoy.
Absolutely. And I guess kind of bringing it back to Richard, we had a chat with at the start about one of the things that I definitely got from him, and that you've mentioned it today, was about, and I know it's in your work, is about processes over outcome. And you kind of mentioned this earlier. So I wonder if you could kind of talk about this, because I think for many people, it's the outcome. And even for myself, I remember doing a master's degree, and all I was thinking about was, I just want to, get the graduation cap on, throw it in the air, have a couple of beers after with the family, and then move on with my life. So I wonder, kind of, could you talk about why the process is really something that we should be aiming to fall in love with as opposed to the outcome?
Sure. And first of all, I'm not anti-outcome.
Mm,
I believe in
right.
outcomes. I believe in
Yeah.
results. I have preferences and desired outcomes and results. I've just learned through my own firsthand experience, as well as the experience of folks like Rich, that sticking to the process gives you the best chance to get the outcomes that you desire. And I've also found that in many walks of life, if you can learn to love the process, if you can learn to love the work, then you've already won. Then the result just becomes a nice to have. You know, if instead of worrying about getting the graduation cap, if you actually enjoyed the learning and the taking in of knowledge and everything that you're, you know, that you're improving in yourself, then whether or not you get the graduation cap is irrelevant, because you're already in it. You've already won. But the cool part is that relationship is, the more you enjoy the learning, the more you do your homework, the more you study for your exams, the more likely you are to get the graduation cap. These
Yeah.
things are inextricably linked. They're not completely separate. The problem with skipping steps or not sticking to the process, you undermine your ability to reach those outcomes. And many times, and folks will tell you this in a variety of different fields, the outcome, the joy you get from the actual outcome is usually very short-lived. Like, I see that at this moment, you're not wearing your graduation cap. That's probably because a day after you got the darn thing, you didn't really care anymore, and it was on to the next thing. Well, we spend so much more of our lives in the process than we do enjoying the outcome. So why don't we enjoy the process? You know, there's that adage about, you know, climbing Mount Everest, you know, how long it takes to actually climb to the peak. And then you get all the way to the top, and for about a minute, you're elated. And then it's like, all right, well, now I have to go back down. But you spent hours and days and weeks and months preparing to make that climb. Imagine if you enjoyed all of that time, not just the 1 minute when you were at the summit.
Yeah, man. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I had my Instagram picture and the hat was off, and away I went. But yeah, no, I completely agree. And most likely the man that loves to walk will walk a lot further than the man that just wants to reach a destination. I absolutely agree, and I think that's a great reminder. If we kind of jump onto your book, Sustain Your Game. I read the reviews on it, absolutely fantastic. It's similar to your book, Raise Your Game. I would love to kind of talk a bit about the kind of burnout aspect of it. This is something I've definitely suffered with on myself. I've asked people many times, you know, on the show about what to do with it. It's always a really interesting topic.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could just start off, perhaps just with a basic question. What is burnout?
Burnout is a misalignment between the hours you're logging and the sacrifices you're making, and how much meaning and enjoyment you find in the work that you're doing. It's when those two things splinter and go in different directions. So it's not just from working long hours or making sacrifices, because we all know people, we talked about Kobe earlier, that work long hours and that make sacrifices, but find so much meaning and enjoyment in what they're doing, they're not at risk at burnout. It's when those two things become disconnected. You know, when you're showing up to your job and you're working 60 hours a week, but you don't find meaning in it, you don't find it purposeful, it no longer fascinates you, it's not aligned with your core values, you don't feel like you're making a contribution to something bigger than yourself, that's when you're at risk of burnout. So it's making sure those two things stay heavily connected.
Wow, I love that, and I've never heard that before, and I feel like that is representative of my own experience. I absolutely love that, and it's interesting because I feel like there's a kind of a hustle porn culture, you know, where it's, you know, popular to just push through the pain. You know, particularly here, I find in the UK, you know, it's a little bit taboo to say, you know, I feel a bit tired, I feel a little bit, you know, burnt out. It's always, you know, oh, one more rep, or sleep is for the weak. And those things, you know, in a short-term context, I feel like they can be useful, although I'm not sure for how long. But I wonder if you could kind of talk about, well, what are some of the effects, whether that's physical, physiological, or whether that's even psychological, that come with being burned out?
Ultimately, what I look at, it's kind of the quality versus quantity thing. I am still a huge believer in giving your best effort when you make a decision to do something. I mean, this dovetails all the way back to the beginning of the conversation. How you do anything is how you do everything. So I'm not about half-assing anything. If you're going to do it, be all in. However, you have to put some guardrails up, and you can't be all in 24/7. You can't be given 100% 24/7. You can't be working 18 hours a day and expect to do that for long, sustained periods of time. So it's about being very strategic on when you want to go all in and give everything your effort. Then in other times, you need to rest. You need to recharge. You need to rejuvenate. You need to step away. You need to digitally unplug. You need to do things that will allow you to give your best when it's time to turn it back on again. And this is not contradictory to what we're saying before. This is not about not giving your best. It's about understanding that, you can't run a 100-meter dash with excuse me, let me rephrase that. You cannot run a marathon with the same level of intensity and urgency that you would run a 100-meter dash. They're very different distances. On some level, you need to pace yourself so that you can finish all 26.2 miles of a marathon. Well, there's times in our lives where we need to sprint. You have a deadline coming up in a week, or you just found out you're going to have a big guest on your podcast and you only have 24 hours notice and you really want to prep. So maybe you sacrifice a little sleep tonight. That's fine. There are times where we need to sprint, but then there's also times where we need to be playing the long game and saying, I need to prioritize my self-care. I need to prioritize my sleep, eating well, getting exercise, building fruitful relationships, working on my own personal and professional development. So that, to me, that's vital. And when those things are out of whack, that's when you're at risk for burnout. When you just have your foot on the gas all of the time, you're gonna run yourself ragged. And physically, mentally, and emotionally, these things are all interconnected. When your body starts to wear down, when you're lacking sleep and you're not eating well and you're not exercising, you better believe that has a huge effect on your mental acuity, on your ability to focus, on your ability to comprehend. Then if you're physically and mentally tired, you'll probably be a little bit moody. You'll be a little irritable. So now emotionally, it's starting to deteriorate your relationships because you're snapping at your kids or saying something dismissive to your spouse because you're in a bad mood because you've emptied your bucket physically and mentally. So these things are all interrelated and connected, and we have to take care of them in order to thrive and be our best over the long haul.
Right. And one of the key signs for me personally is I love playing the piano. And I know as soon as I lose any interest, if I'm, really tired, and I'll know if I'm playing it, I just think, I just don't want to be here. When usually I know that is a classic sign that maybe it's time for me to step back a little bit. So are there any kind of other telltale signs that really someone could look for?
No, you just mentioned the primary ones: severe lack of motivation, severe irritability. Those are the two big ones, and they often go hand in hand as well. Now, keep in mind, we're looking for consistent patterns. If you're occasionally irritable, that just means you're human. If you're occasionally unmotivated, that just means you're human. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're finding that every single day you have to, you're just sludging through and you're constantly in a bad mood and you're snapping at people and you're arguing with people on Twitter, then I would lift up the hood and take a look at the engine to figure that out. But these occasional setbacks, that's part of the human condition. That's something we all sign up for at birth.
I love it, man. What is the opposite of burnout? What does that look like in day to day?
I would say fulfillment. Yeah, fulfillment is the opposite of burnout. And fulfillment's kind of my North Star, is finding a meaning in the work that I do, feeling like I'm making a contribution to the world around me and to those that I work with, enjoying what I do. Now, if you look at my entire day, it does not mean that every second of every day is puppy dogs and ice cream and rainbows. Yeah, there's occasionally things that I have to do that aren't my favorite thing to do, but they are a means to an end that allow me to do the things that I love. So I'm not talking about living in some fantasy land where every moment is pure bliss, but generally speaking, if you've organized and designed your life around fulfillment, most of what you get to do, you enjoy. And you enjoy who you do it with and where you do it and what you do. So to me, that's the antidote to burnout, is fulfillment and enjoyment.
I love that, man. I love that. So I guess for a practical question, someone's listening to this now. They've listened to everything that we've said about about high performance. They've gone through, they've taken away the incredible value that you've brought. They feel like at the moment they've kind of lost their mojo. They're feeling a little bit irritable, even though they've had their morning coffee. They're not enjoying playing the piano or whatever it is that they're doing. What can they do to kind of get over this burnout that they're going through?
Well, the very first thing is take a deep breath and just know that you're not alone, and know that it's okay to not be okay, that you are a human being. So one of the worst things you can do when you're feeling that way is stacking on guilt and shame on top of that and making yourself feel worse, is making yourself feel lousy for feeling lousy. Like, that is part of the human condition. You're allowed to feel that way. Second, I would actually congratulate you for having the awareness to recognize the fact that you might be approaching burnout. Awareness is always the first step to improvement. You will never improve something you're oblivious to, and you will never fix something that you're unaware of. So just the fact that you can say, you know what, I might be approaching burnout, is a huge step forward, and you should celebrate that. So the first thing you do is you give yourself some grace and give yourself permission to be human, and just know that it's okay to not be okay. Then actually congratulate yourself for figuring out that and being aware of the fact that you might be running into this issue. Then do some introspection and try and heighten self-awareness to try to figure out why. And you might need to recruit the people that know you the best. You might need to ask your spouse or a good friend or an adult child or a colleague or a coworker and say, I used to find so much meaning and joy in this job, and I no longer do. And try to figure out why. Maybe your job responsibilities have changed over the years, and you've been asked to do things that aren't in your strength zone. Maybe a whole bunch of people that you used to work with have left, and you just don't jive with the new people that replace them. So you don't enjoy the people that you work with. Maybe your company had a new leader take over 2 years ago, and you're not in alignment with the culture that they've created. Like, start to ask yourself why, because sometimes it could be something as simple as staying with the same organization, but maybe taking on a new role or moving to a new department or doing something differently. If you give that a try and you still are feeling burned out, then maybe you need to leave that organization and go do something else. And then you have to ask yourself, was it the organization or was it the vocation? If I'm working as an accountant, do I go work as an accountant somewhere else? And if you're still burnt out there, then maybe accounting is not for you anymore, and you have to figure something else out. But there's a variety of ways that you can kind of tiptoe around to figure that out. But like most things, once you strike the nerve of something that you love, it'll become very obvious to you. And that's what you should be searching for, is how can I get the love back? How can I find meaning in the work that I do?
I love that. And for the people listening that want more, I know that you cover this and a whole host more in your book, Sustain Your Game, which I'm going to put a link below for everybody. You can just swipe up and check out Alan's book. I'd love to ask you a couple of personal questions.
Sure,
Because one of the things that I've loved about you, I've been familiar with your work. Obviously I've spoken with you today, and I've very much enjoyed, if I say so myself. I've listened to a lot of your other work, and you have a lot of energy, a real high energy person. I'd love to know kind of, where does that come from? How do you kind of cultivate that energy?
Well, what surprises a lot of people is I'm heavily introverted. Now, just to be clear, I love people. This does not mean I'm antisocial. It means I derive my energy from being in solitude. I actually crave alone time. So as much as I've enjoyed this conversation, and I have immensely, this actually drains my bucket because I'm pouring so much into it. So when this is over, then I have to refill my cup by being in solitude, having some stillness and some quiet to refill my cup for whatever's next in my day. It's amazing. I've had a few days, especially during the pandemic, where I'm in my place, I'm in my office most of the day. I'll do 3 or 4 interviews like this. And at the end of that 4th one, I feel like I just ran back-to-back marathons. I am exhausted. And all I'm doing is sitting and talking. Like, it's not even like I'm doing anything that's physically exhausting, but it's emotionally exhausting. So when I said that often at night, I just unplug from my phone and I chill out and watch some Netflix, eat a healthy dinner, and go to bed early, I'm being sincere. That actually is how I recharge myself, so that the next morning I wake up and I'm high energy and ready to pour into some others. So for the most part, if you want to be high energy when the lights come on, you have to figure out how to get to that point during the unseen hours. And it's one of the reasons that I love keynote speaking, because there's a lot of that that's done in solitude. I'll travel on a plane to go somewhere, 2 or 3 hour flight, and it's just me and my thoughts or listening to a podcast. I'll get there, I can do my song and dance, and that will drain me. And then I get to go back to my hotel room and it's nice and quiet and I can recharge. So it's very compartmentalized, which is one of the reasons that I love this work so much.
I love it, man. I love it. I'd love to kind of ask you, because obviously the people, that are listening to this, that are familiar with you, you seem to be a very mission-driven person. I'd love to kind of ask you, what is it that has really driven you or that drives you now at kind of this stage of your life?
So I've said this on a couple of other recent podcasts, and it's actually been heavily praised, and folks have really resonated with it. And it's not an original quote or thought of mine, but it is a mantra that I live by, and that is, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. And that's kind of how I view my work and my purpose. My goal is to light as many candles as I can. I'm hoping that we lit some today with our conversation. I'm hoping the next time I'm on stage, I get to light some. I hope anytime someone makes the investment to read one of my books, that it lights their candle in some way. That's really how I view my work. Now, the specific way that I do it, and specifically the topic or the theme, that may vary a little bit, but ultimately that's what I find purpose in, is how many candles can I light every single day? And I don't take any of them for granted, because it's easy to get lost into this sea of numbers. If I can light one person's candle on one day, that's a huge win. If I could change the course of somebody's life by something that I share on stage or on page or in a podcast, I value that. And it's easy to get caught up in numbers and think, well, man, I want to change thousands of lives every single day. Okay. And some days that may happen, but other days, can you have an impact on one person? Because then there's the ripple effect. If I pour into you, if anything I said in this conversation in just a very small way changes the trajectory of your life, and then you pass that on to somebody else, now you're lighting somebody else's candle, we're actually starting to work together, and this concept will spread. So to me, that's where I find meaning and purpose, is lighting other people's candles.
Well, I should say I am burning bright right now, so you consider it a job well done. I'd love to ask you, just in terms of a very practical, I guess, suggestion, in terms of the things that you do daily. You mentioned kind of you need that time, that solitude time. What would be one thing that you do as kind of maybe a habit or as a routine, maybe a sleep, maybe a diet, who knows what it could be, that you do day to day, that really enables you to perform at a higher level?
So on a very specific tactical level, I make my bed every single morning. It takes me about 8 seconds to make my bed. I mean, I'm not making it with, military corners or anything like that, but it takes me about 8 seconds. And I've done that since I was probably 25. So, we're going over 20 years now. And it's because I'm a huge believer that discipline is the key to freedom. Discipline is the key to fulfillment. Discipline is the key to high performance. And what better way to start my day than with a very small act of discipline? If the very first thing I do every day of my life is just a small act of discipline, going back to how we started the conversation, it starts to build that muscle. It starts to give me a vote for being a disciplined person. And that's how I like to start my day. On more of a macro level, I kind of have a morning routine and an evening routine. The goal of the evening routine is to wind down, unplug, and prepare myself to get restful sleep, because sleep is so important to every function of our body: mental, physical, emotional. Sleep is vital. Sleep isn't very sexy. You don't sell a lot of books or a lot of courses just talking about sleep, but sleep is so, so important. People are always looking for these hacks and these shortcuts and these apps. Just get some sleep. And then morning routine is to prep myself and prime myself to have a very effective day. Most days of the week, I do something physically to move my body. If I'm training for something, I choose to nourish myself with primarily healthy foods. So I'm very careful about what I eat. I try to make sure that I'm filling my mental space with positive, uplifting, enriching, inspiring content, educational content. So I have very high discernment in what I read, watch, and listen to. I've drastically curtailed my own social media consumption over the last couple of years to try to keep some of that stuff out. So my morning routine is more of a guideline. It's not like, hey, I wake up at this time, I do this for 2 minutes, I do this for 4 minutes. It's not that structured. And again, if that works for somebody else, that's wonderful. Mine are just more of an overarching guideline. Every day in the first 60 minutes when I wake up, can I engage my mind, my body, and my heart? Can I get a little bit of a sweat going? Can I eat something healthy? Can I stay off of the things that could drag my mood down, like social media? And if I can do that when I first wake up, it usually primes myself for having a good day.
Amazing. I got two questions we sign off all our podcasts with.
Okay.
The first one is, you've obviously written two fantastic books yourself.
Thank you.
I'd love to ask you, are there any books that you've read that have greatly impacted your life?
Yes. Well, one of the most influential was one of Coach K's first books, who was the former men's basketball coach at Duke University. And he wrote a book called Leading with the Heart. I've worn the pages off of that thing. I've read it so many times. I think it came out in the early 2000s. Another one, and I'm sure most of your listeners have already read this because he sold 5 million copies, but that's James Clear's Atomic Habits. I talk a lot about habits, and everything that I share as far as habits has been heavily influenced by James and his work. So those are two books right off the bat that I recommend everybody check out.
Amazing, man. My last question for you today, before I ask you to sign off, tell these guys where they can connect with you and the great content that you're putting out, is what makes a life worth living?
Well, you can't see it now because I'm wearing long sleeves. I have two tattoo half sleeves on either arm, and I have a quote on this arm that says, "Live the life you love and love the life you live." I believe that was a Bob Marley quote originally. I don't know, and I didn't put Bob Marley on my arm, just the quote. But to me, that's really it. Live a life that you love, and then love and appreciate the life that you live, and that's that. As you can see, I kind of like to speak in quotes. Quotes for some reason, and these mantras. Whether it's a candle lighting another candle, or it's how you do anything is how you do everything, or live the life you love the life you live. There's something about the way those words are arranged that just really resonates with me, and I find deep meaning in it.
Absolutely, me too. I would love to kind of just ask you now, just to sign off and tell these guys that are listening where they can connect with you, the great work which you're putting out. What would you like to send our audience to check out?
Sure. Well, if anyone's interested in my speaking programs, whether virtual or if someone wants to pay to have me come over the pond to the UK, I would love to do that. They can go to alansteinjr.com. I also have a supplemental site, strongerteam.com, which has info on my books, my podcast. I have an online course, and I do some exclusive one-on-one coaching with a small handful of clients. I'm very accessible and responsive on social media at Alan Stein Jr. On Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And if you're interested in either book, just search Raise Your Game or Sustain Your Game on Audible or Amazon or wherever you like to buy your books or audiobooks. And this was a delightful conversation. If anybody has any questions, or you want to share something, or just reach out to say hello, just shoot me a direct message on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm very good about getting back to people.
I love it, man. Everything you mentioned there will be linked below so our audience can just swipe up. I want to pay my gratitude to you, Alan, because you've really, really brought, so much heat. I feel a lot of candles will be lit from this conversation today. I really, really appreciate you coming on and for your incredibly clear and insightful message and the energy that you bring. It's been a real, real treat for me. So I can't thank you enough for coming on, man.
Oh, this was so much fun for me too. You do a terrific job, and I appreciate you.